I think of my work as having sort of tendrils, and it's all coming about from lots of elements and the way elements relate to each other. I think there is something about my own space in a world. When you start to think about you're one of 6.5 billion individuals, what uniqueness means in that kind of context. This idea that one's identity is defined by the choices they make, the car they drive, and the clothes they buy, and the kind of couch they have, as one of the main ways of representing one's identity is interesting to me.
From the start, Jason's work seemed very different to me, very unique. And of course, one of the things that sets Jason apart as being an artist of the digital age is that his medium isn't that of the lightbox or the print so much as the computer code. So that is then a tool just like paint, just like clay, just like the camera. Jason Salavon mines contemporary culture by analyzing and reconfiguring those common products of our culture. He's able to reveal uncanny patterns, structures, beauty also within that sort of mundane environment that surrounds us.
I think my relationship and my work's relationship to culture has always been not the thickest membrane. That is, I'm okay with things slipping into other, if the work slips into other culture, into mainstream culture, into popular culture, or if those things seep into the work, those things are okay with me.
Well, I remember seeing Jason's work in the late 90s. The first thing I saw, for sure, was the Grand Unification Theory series.
1 frame per second of 4 iconic films, all to be treated the same way. Every second of Star Wars, every second of Snow White, every second of It's a Wonderful Life, and every second of Deep Throat. In each case, I took 1 frame per second and rearranged the entire film as a one single photograph, with the brightest frames in the center radiating it out to the darkest frames at the edge. So it's a rearrangement of the film based purely on the luminosity of a particular frame. My interest in popular culture is fairly intuitive. I've always been interested in music, movies, TV, the top grossing film of all time, which is actually the film Titanic. So in that piece, which is a child of those earlier projects, every frame of the film Titanic is abstracted to a solid color. Some kind of abstract treatment of that film speaks to its original content and something more universal about maybe the way films are crafted or the way we read narrative.
This is also a really interesting take on what's been a kind of theme for American artists, in particular over the last 30, 40, 50 years. It's part of the lineage of pop art in a sense. Think about how Andy Warhol dealt with consumer culture by mirroring it in a fairly bland, somewhat ironic way, a cool way. And then in the 80s, the generation that Salavon would have grown up with of consumer culture critique artists like Jeff Koons, Chaim Steinbach, and the like, they really were very much about critiquing the culture in a very obvious way. Now Jason comes along the next generation, and his work seems wholly different in that it doesn't mirror, it doesn't critique, it really, to me, analyzes culture.
One of the more recent sort of evolutions of some aspects of my work comes out in this project, Everything All at Once, Part 3. It's taking a real-time television feed, whatever's on TV right now, and processing it in a similar way to a way the Titanic piece might have been processed. Any single frame of incoming television becomes a color. The TV experience is transformed into this purely radiating circular pattern.
It's a fantastic piece. It's one of my favorite works by Jason. Jason takes the stuff of everyday life in America right now, and he runs it through technological processes, these computer systems that he has generated, and the output that results from that is this kind of sublime and seductive imagery.
I developed a body of work I called amalgamations, such as all the homes for sale in a particular region. So the final piece would be 114 homes for sale in Chicagoland. And they would all be homes on the market in a particular time at a particular price point, the photographs, the realtor photographs, and a compression, an averaging of those into one image. I've done maybe half a dozen various projects based on that. Every Playboy centerfold. We've done the same thing with 4 decades worth of centerfolds to reveal over the course of the decades. You really see a change from the first to the last. You know, the first one, this figure that's 120 photographs, almost looks like she's real blurry, but she looks like she's turned to the side, and we have the hairs in the face a little bit, and then over the 4 decades, you see it's like she's rotating in space. The camera's brightening her figure, and so there's a reveal of how that type of portrait photography has changed over 40 years.
Another series that relates to that idea is Jason's his series of photographs where he's taking stock images of weddings or of graduations and gathering these images of anonymous people from the internet and then running them through processes so you get a composite image. You know, there's a way that you can just, again, give yourself over to the pleasure of looking at this kind of hazy image, but the real kick to it has to do with the ways that we all absorb these conventions about how we're supposed to stand in a photograph.
A large-scale video project called the Late Night Triad, which is a video version of the same sort of idea that uses 64 monologues during the summer of 2003 from Jay Leno, from Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and from David Letterman, and play all those monologues simultaneously. They're so regimented in the presentation that when you see all three together, there's really distinct performative aspects that come out. The Jay Leno is like a whirling dervish. He's like this ghost that's all over the place. And the Conan O'Brien, who I think is a really interesting performer, but he is a really on the mark, doesn't move a lot performer. And so you actually see his facial features line up where his nose locks in. You know, it's that sort of regimented on a nightly basis, and Letterman's somewhere in between. But so that sort of performative character is something I was intuited you would get some information about. Besides it being this sort of interesting, hazy sort of image with, I also have all the soundtracks, so you're hearing that sort of ghost. That you would get other information like something in their performative character.
And just recently, his Late Night Triad was purchased by the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. It is the first video work, in fact, the first electronic work of any kind to enter their permanent collection, which is very telling, not just about where art is headed formally, but also as to maybe who our heroes are that we want to sort of enshrine within the National Portrait Gallery.